This is the World Organic News Supplemental podcast on the complete book of Self-Sufficiency by Seymour. John Moore reporting. In our journey through the complete book of Self-Sufficiency, we are up to the textile crafts, spinning, dyeing and weaving. These are divided into wool and cotton and then flax. Wool and cotton were the starting point of the industrial revolutions in northwestern Europe, yet the skills discussed in this section are from the cottage industry level of technology, and these skills are possible to learn. I built a hand spindle myself, straight piece of doweling with a weight at one end. The idea is basically an upside-down spinning top, no pun intended. I would never claim to be a spinner, but I did spin yarn. If I can do it, so too can you. The question to ask yourself is, why would I do this? I did it just to see if I could. If it appeals to you, follow your interest. I can't recall exactly, but I read somewhere that the weaver needed the products of 20 spinners to make it worth the effort to start weaving. So if you're going to do it yourself, 20 weeks of spinning will give you enough yarn for a week's weaving, and that's something to contemplate. You may wish to master all the skills from sheep husbandry or cotton and flax growing to spinning, dyeing, weaving and sewing, but you don't have to. You can decide to master just one step in the process, or two even, and make that your niche. When the complete book of self-sufficiency hit the bookshops, eBay and Etsy were still a generation or two away, and they are here now. Finished products or inputs for someone else means that others are making, if not a living, at least a part-time income. And you can master the skills outlined by Seymour. Moving on from textiles, we find the gentle art of leather curing and tanning. This is part of the use everything but the moo or bar attitude to animal husbandry which permeates the book. I've never attempted tanning, but the info provided makes it possible, and I may just have a go in the future. At this point, the book leaves what could be described as the domestic crafts and moves to a more engineering-based focus. Seymour explains mud brick making and building techniques. These are pretty straightforward. I've met people who have built their own homes with mud bricks. Great thermal qualities, heat retention internally if needed, and protection from heat wave if that's your climate. From mud bricks we move on to stone masonry. This is a highly skilled craft and can't really be picked up as quickly as mud brick work. Yet small projects lead to bigger ones, and time teaches much. So if you are drawn to stone, there is much useful material here. Metalwork completes the trio of material skills. Blacksmithing is the foundation of this section. Iron and steel are metals covered. Copper, bronze and brass are separate skills not covered. Horseshoes and hand tools form the majority of the techniques covered, for these fit into the ethos of the book. Combining mud bricks, stone and metalwork, Seymour describes a few methods for building houses, barns and other structures. This feeds into the woodworking section and some good hints and suggestions on tools and projects. Water supply through well building by hand leads to ponds and fish farming. Not the industrial salmon production polluting the oceans of the world, but old-style fish farming, with its roots in the medieval manor house and monastic traditions. Polycultures, duck integration and so on, with the same philosophical stance as his approach to land-based food production. Tying the household crafts together, Seymour concludes with a general-purpose furnace. Heat-efficient, fuel-efficient, and capable of being hand-built, it can produce its own charcoal, heat water, and bake bread. And this is the last section of the complete book of self-sufficiency. It seems to me most fitting. From the introduction's examination of the web of life to a renewable energy engine for the farmstead, Seymour takes the reader through food, clothing, shelter and crafts to sustain and expand the mind as well as the body. I find a special place within my heart for this book. It was my first step into a world I felt existed but was unable to access. This book led me into adulthood, small area farming, a degree in archaeology, and a lifelong passion for organic advocacy. It is a work of its time, but it is not diminished for this. Google it, eBay it, Amazon it, or however else you access good old three-dimensional paper-based information services, or as we called them last millennium, books, and grab yourself a copy. I've decided to run this series on the individuals and institutions who have shaped the organic world as a series of supplemental podcasts, as and when I reread the books and carry out the research. I'll give warning in the weekly podcast when one is on its way. Any suggestions, feedback or criticisms of the podcast or blog are most welcome. Email me at podcast@worldorganicnews.com. A transcript of each episode is available on the blog at www.worldorganicnews.com under the tab Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back on Monday with the usual weekly podcast.